In 1921, Frank Seiberling was worth more than $100 million. He had built the largest tire company in the world. Presidents consulted him for advice. His estate covered 3,000 acres of Ohio countryside. Within 6 months, it was all gone. Bankers from New York seized everything. The company he had built from nothing, the empire that took 23 years to create, no longer belonged to him. At 62 years old, he was left with nothing but his name. This is not merely a story of success and collapse. It is the story of what a man chooses to do when he loses everything except his reputation. It is also the story of a house that became a symbol of both greatness and loss, and of a meeting held in a small cottage on that estate that would later affect millions of lives worldwide.
Stan Hewitt Hall still stands today in Akron, Ohio. With 65 rooms and more than 64,000 square feet of Tudor-style elegance, visitors admire its architecture, gardens, and antiques. Few truly understand the life of the man who built it. Frank Seiberling did not inherit wealth. He did not begin life with privilege. At nearly 40 years old, he was unemployed, responsible for 3 children, and facing an uncertain future. What followed would transform a small Ohio city into the rubber capital of the world. This is the full story of Stan Hewitt Hall, the ambition behind its creation, the fortune that paid for it, the crisis that nearly destroyed its owner, and the unexpected legacy that continues to save lives nearly a century later.
In 1898, Frank Augustus Seiberling was 38 years old, out of work, and desperate. His father, John Seiberling, had once been a highly successful Ohio manufacturer. He had invented farm machinery that brought the family wealth and security. Frank grew up believing he would inherit a thriving business. That belief collapsed during the financial panics of the 1890s. Banks failed, companies shut down, and the street railway business owned by his father went bankrupt. Soon after, the farm machinery company followed. By 1898, the family fortune was gone. Frank was married to his wife Gertrude, and together they had 3 young children. He had spent years working as secretary and treasurer in his father's business. Now that business no longer existed. His experience prepared him for a world that had disappeared. He needed a new path forward. Frank soon learned about an abandoned strawboard factory on Akron's east side. The property sat empty on 7 acres of land. The owners wanted $13,500. Frank did not have $13,000. He did not even have $1,000. But he saw potential where others saw failure. Akron already had rubber manufacturers. B.F. Goodrich had operated there for decades. Skilled rubber workers lived nearby, waiting for work. Frank approached his brother-in-law, Lucius Miles, and asked for a loan. Miles agreed to lend him $3,500 for a down payment. It was a significant risk for both men. With borrowed money, Frank bought the abandoned factory. He now had a building, but nothing else. No equipment, no workforce, no customers, and no products. All he had was an idea. Frank named his new company after a man who had died penniless decades earlier. Charles Goodyear had discovered vulcanization, the process that made rubber strong, flexible, and durable. Despite changing the world, Goodyear never profited from his invention and died deeply in debt. His name symbolized innovation without reward. Frank chose it anyway. Perhaps he recognized a reflection of himself, a man with a powerful idea but no financial security. On August 29, 1898, Frank and his brother Charles officially formed the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Frank was not the first president. That role went to David Hill, a business associate who invested $30,000. Frank became secretary and general manager. The company's early products were modest: bicycle tires, horseshoe pads, and carriage tire tubes. A small team worked inside the converted factory. Nothing about the operation suggested global dominance. Frank was betting on one belief: the automobile was coming. In 1898, most Americans had never seen a car. Horses still ruled city streets. But Frank had read about experiments underway in Detroit and elsewhere. He knew automobiles would need tires, and many of them. The early years were difficult. Frank became involved in a lengthy legal battle with the Consolidated Tire Company over patent rights. Consolidated claimed a monopoly on carriage tires. For 2 years, all profits from Goodyear's carriage tire sales were held in escrow. Eventually, the court ruled in Frank's favor, declaring Consolidated's practices unfair. The escrowed money was released, and Goodyear survived. Frank was not satisfied with survival. He wanted leadership. He studied the flaws of early automobile tires, which were difficult to install and prone to failure. Drivers hated them. In 1901, Goodyear introduced the straight-side tire, featuring a braided wire bead that secured the tire while allowing easier removal. The improvement was immediate and noticeable. Frank also understood the importance of efficiency. In 1908, working with chief engineer William State, he helped develop a tire-building machine that automated production. The Sieberling-State machine transformed the industry. Tire production increased 12-fold. By 1913, more than half of all tires made in America were produced using this machine. Frank became president of Goodyear in 1906. Though small in stature, his relentless drive earned him the nickname the Little Napoleon. He had begun with borrowed money and an empty factory. Now he was building an industrial empire. By 1910, Frank Seiberling was known throughout the rubber industry. Though he lacked physical presence, his influence was immense. Goodyear had grown beyond anything he imagined when he signed the factory purchase papers. The straight-side tire succeeded. Production costs dropped. Frank wanted more. He wanted Goodyear tires installed directly on automobiles as they left factory lines. In 1907, Goodyear opened operations in Detroit to service the automobile industry. One customer proved crucial. Henry Ford was preparing to introduce an affordable car for everyday Americans. He needed tires that were cheap, reliable, and delivered on time. Goodyear became a supplier for the Model T beginning in 1908. As Ford expanded, Goodyear grew alongside him. By 1909, Goodyear entered aviation. Aircraft required lightweight tires and rubberized fabric. Goodyear supplied both. Frank believed that if rubber was needed, Goodyear should produce it. He also understood branding. Early on, Frank created a logo inspired by Mercury, the Roman god of commerce and travel. The winged foot symbolized speed, quality, and reliability. Customers learned to trust it. Frank treated workers differently from many industrial leaders of his time. He believed secure, well-housed employees were more productive and loyal. Akron's rapid growth had created a housing shortage. Frank responded by building neighborhoods. Goodyear housing provided affordable homes for factory workers. Fairlawn Heights housed managers and engineers. Workers became homeowners and invested in the city's future. Innovation continued. Goodyear introduced the double diamond tread for better traction on poor roads. Engineers developed pneumatic truck tires, replacing solid rubber designs that exhausted drivers and damaged cargo. By 1918, air-filled tires dominated trucking. Frank earned 19 patents covering rims, tread designs, and manufacturing processes. He was not just a businessman, but an engineer who understood his products.
In 1900, Goodyear employed only a few workers.
By 1910, it employed thousands. In 1916, Goodyear became the largest tire manufacturer in the world. The little Napoleon had conquered the rubber industry. Yet Frank wanted something more lasting than profits and production figures. He wanted a home that reflected his achievements, something that would endure. And he already knew who would help him build it.
Gertrude Ferguson Penfield came from a world far removed from factories and rubber. Her life began in the realm of music, culture, and performance. Trained as a contralto, the lowest and richest female vocal range, she possessed a deep, powerful voice that demanded discipline and skill. Singing was not a casual pastime for her, it was a serious pursuit. In October of 1887, at just 21 years old, she married Frank Seiberling, who was 28 at the time. Their wedding took place near Lake Erie, and their early marriage unfolded during some of the most difficult years of Frank's life. As Frank faced professional failures and financial uncertainty following the collapse of his father's businesses, Gertrude remained a steady presence at his side. When he took the enormous risk of borrowing money to purchase an abandoned factory, she supported him without hesitation. By the time Goodyear began its rise, their bond had already been tested by hardship. They were not simply husband and wife, but true partners. While Frank's business expanded, Gertrude's reputation in music grew as well. During the administration of President William Howard Taft, she was invited to perform at the White House. Between 1909 and 1913, she sang at a state dinner, an Ohio contralto performing for the President of the United States. It was a remarkable achievement and a reflection of her standing in the cultural world. Back home, Gertrude became a driving force in Akron's musical life. She supported the Tuesday Musical Association, an organization founded by women to promote musical education and performance. Under her influence, the association brought renowned performers to the city and enriched the cultural life of the community. Yet Gertrude sought more than participation. From 1919 to 1921, she served as president of the National Federation of Music Clubs, a nationwide organization representing music societies across America. Her influence had grown from local stages to the national level. In 1924, she founded the Akron Garden Club, adding landscape and horticulture to her passions. Music remained central to her identity, but gardens soon became another creative outlet. Both would play a major role in shaping the home she and Frank envisioned. Together, the Seiberlings had 7 children, 3 daughters and 4 sons. Their family experienced both joy and loss. Their youngest daughter, Grace Winona, died at just 18 months old from bronchial pneumonia, a tragedy that deeply affected them all. By 1910, the remaining children ranged from infancy to young adulthood, and the family home had become crowded. Frank's wealth had grown tremendously, yet their house no longer suited their needs or aspirations. Gertrude imagined something larger and more purposeful, a home where music could thrive, with a grand room for concerts and gatherings of artists and performers. Frank had his own requirements, space for business entertaining and hosting influential guests. The children had wishes too, including an indoor swimming pool that could be used year-round. While every family member contributed ideas, it was Gertrude who would define the soul of the house. Frank could build an empire, Gertrude would shape a cultural sanctuary. By 1910, Frank Seiberling had the means to build almost anything, yet he lacked a clear vision. He began acquiring farmland on Akron's western edge, an area of rolling hills far removed from the noise and smoke of industry. Over time, he assembled a vast estate that included an abandoned stone quarry, an eyesore to some, but an opportunity to him. Unlike many wealthy Americans of the era who favored French or Italian designs, the Seiberlings were drawn to England. In the spring of 1912, Frank and Gertrude traveled to Great Britain with their eldest daughter and architect Charles Schneider. They wanted more than photographs. They needed to experience English manor houses firsthand. Their journey nearly intersected with disaster.
Some accounts suggest they had planned to sail on the Titanic's return voyage, which never occurred after the ship sank in April 1912. Instead, they traveled safely on another vessel and began touring the English countryside. Over several weeks, they visited around 20 manor houses, studying what worked and what did not. 3 estates left the strongest impression. Compton Wineyates in Warwickshire revealed how a home could grow organically over centuries. Owlpen Manor demonstrated how timber framing and generous windows could create warmth and light. Haddon Hall, largely unchanged for hundreds of years, showed how architecture and landscape could exist in harmony. The Seiberlings returned to Ohio with clarity. Their home would follow the English Tudor tradition, not as a replica, but as an original design adapted to American materials and craftsmanship. The abandoned quarry inspired its name. Derived from Old English, Ston Hewitt referred to a stone quarry, tying the house to the land. Frank assembled a team to bring the vision to life. Charles Schneider designed the structure, landscape architect Warren Manning shaped the grounds, and interior decorator Hugo Huber furnished the rooms. Above the entrance, they placed a Latin motto meaning "Not for us alone," signaling that the home was meant to serve the broader community. Construction began in 1912, though none of them knew it would take 3 years to complete. The sheer ambition of the project became clear when the architectural plans arrived. 3,000 detailed drawings documenting every element of the house. The manor would stretch 300 feet, rise 4 stories, include a full-length basement, and encompass more than 64,000 square feet. Building on a remote hillside posed logistical challenges. To transport materials, workers constructed a temporary railroad spur directly onto the property. Stone, brick, lumber, and steel arrived from across the nation and beyond. The house used red brick, steel framing, Vermont slate roofing, copper detailing, and rare woods, including oak, walnut, teak, and rosewood. The land itself supplied materials as well. Stone from the quarry was repurposed for construction and landscaping. Skilled craftsmen from major cities handled specialized work: wood paneling, carved ceilings, leaded glass windows, iron fixtures, and decorative tile. Every room demanded its own design language. Delays were inevitable. Harsh winters slowed progress, and the complexity of the interior extended timelines. Frustrated by rising costs, Frank eventually moved into the unfinished house in 1915 to oversee the final work. That Christmas, the family celebrated in their new home for the first time. Estimates suggest the manor alone cost over $500,000, with total expenses exceeding $3 million when furnishings and landscaping were included, an extraordinary sum for the era. The Seiberlings would call it home for the next 40 years.
When completed, Stan Hyoet contained 65 rooms spread across 4 floors and a full basement. The scale was immense: 18 bedrooms, more than 20 bathrooms, 23 fireplaces, and hundreds of doors. Yet numbers alone could not capture the experience. Visitors entered into a vast great hall, the heart of the house, defined by heavy beams, carved wood panels, tapestries, and a grand rug. From there, rooms radiated outward. The 2-story music room was designed for performances, complete with an organ and piano. The formal dining room could host 40 guests, while smaller spaces offered intimacy. The house accommodated both family and staff, with separate wings for servants and modern systems to manage communication. The basement featured an indoor swimming pool, gymnasium, and utility spaces. Telephones, call buttons, and heating systems reflected cutting-edge technology for the time. A 4-story tower offered sweeping views of the estate, and most of the original furnishings remain today. Rugs, tapestries, chandeliers, and artwork remain exactly as the family left them. Walking through Stan Hyoet now is like stepping into the Seiberlings' world, preserved in stone, wood, and memory.
The vision for Stan Hyoet extended far beyond the walls of the house itself. The surrounding land was treated as an equal partner to the architecture, not a decorative afterthought. Years before construction on the manor began, landscape architect Warren Manning was already shaping the terrain. Having worked closely with Frederick Law Olmsted, the creator of Central Park, Manning believed that a great home must grow naturally from its environment rather than dominate it. At its height, the estate may have stretched across thousands of acres, encompassing farmland, forests, and rolling hills. One of the most difficult features to address was an abandoned stone quarry carved deep into the land. Rather than erase it, Manning reimagined the scar as a centerpiece. The quarry was transformed into a chain of 5 interconnected lagoons that reflected the sky and softened the landscape. During warm months, the family swam and boated on the water that once symbolized industrial damage. Manning designed the grounds using carefully planned sightlines, which he called vistas. Trees were selectively removed or planted to frame long views extending outward from the house, visually linking the manor to the distant countryside. One of his most striking features was a long birch-lined walkway stretching hundreds of feet from the home. At its end stood 2 small tea houses overlooking the water, offering quiet places for reflection. Closer to the house, Manning arranged a series of outdoor rooms, each with its own function and atmosphere. The English garden became one of the most intricate spaces, enclosed by walls and filled with flowering plants in seasonal color. In 1929, this garden was redesigned by Ellen Biddle Shipman, a pioneering female landscape architect whose influence reshaped American garden design. Nearby, a Japanese garden was constructed within part of the former quarry. While Manning developed the layout, the garden itself was built by Toichiro Osuka, a Japanese landscape artist, bringing authenticity and balance to the design. The estate also included terraces, cutting gardens, and recreational areas. Tennis courts allowed both family members and household staff to play, while croquet lawns reflected the leisure culture of the early 20th century. Riding trails wound through wooded sections of the property, and a small private golf course allowed practice without leaving the grounds. Manning favored native plant species, blending large trees with ornamental varieties and layered perennial plantings to create year-round interest. Beyond beauty, the estate functioned as a working landscape. Nearby farmland produced crops and livestock, including grain, poultry, and fruit. A peach orchard supplied fresh produce, while excess milk was sold commercially. Over time, much of the original acreage was sold or donated, leaving approximately 70 acres today. The remaining grounds have been carefully restored to reflect Manning's original vision, preserving the harmony between land and home. In the summer of 1911, Frank Seiberling made a bold declaration. He would fund an attempt to cross the Atlantic Ocean by airship. Aviation was in its infancy, and while airplanes had proven they could fly, many believed that lighter-than aircraft offered a more practical solution for long-distance travel. Airships could remain airborne for extended periods and carry both people and cargo across vast distances. The project was led by Melvin Vanneman, an experienced aviator, engineer, and photographer. Vanneman had already been involved in a failed Atlantic attempt the year before and was determined to try again. Seiberling agreed to support the effort, and Goodyear was tasked with building the airship's massive gas envelope. Using its expertise in rubberized fabrics, the company constructed a hydrogen-filled airship named Akron, honoring its hometown. It was the first airship Goodyear had ever produced. The Akron stretched roughly 250 feet in length. Vanneman assembled a small crew, including his brother and 3 additional team members. After a series of test flights, the launch site was selected, Atlantic City, New Jersey. The departure date was set for early July 1912. On the morning of the launch, the atmosphere was electric.
Thousands of spectators gathered along the beach and boardwalk, eager to witness history. As the airship lifted into the sky shortly after sunrise, it drifted out toward the ocean. Moments later, catastrophe struck. While still low in the air, the hydrogen ignited. Flames engulfed the airship as it exploded, and the burning gondola plummeted into the shallow waters below. All 5 men aboard were killed instantly. Among the onlookers were the wives of the crew, who had come to see their loved ones embark on a groundbreaking journey. Rescue boats rushed to the scene, but there were no survivors. Investigators later examined the wreckage, but the exact cause of the explosion was never conclusively determined. Some believed excess internal pressure ruptured the gas bag, while others suspected a structural failure in the suspension system. The tragedy occurred only months after the sinking of Titanic, and the public drew parallels between the two disasters, both born of ambition and technological optimism, both ending in loss of life. In the aftermath, Goodyear stepped away from airship development for more than 10 years. Although the company would later become famous for its blims, that future lay far ahead. One artifact survived the disaster, the airship's lifeboat. Recovered from the water, it was returned to Goodyear and stored for nearly a century. In 2010, it was donated to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Melvin Vanneman was just 45 years old when he died. The New York Times described him as a man of promise whose loss was deeply felt, a reminder of the risks taken in humanity's pursuit of the sky.
Stan Hiawatt functioned not only as a grand family home, but as a carefully organized world sustained by a large staff. During the years Frank and Gertrude Seiberling lived there, more than 20 domestic servants worked inside the house, while another group of laborers maintained the gardens, grounds, and surrounding farmland. Every position followed a strict social order. Among the female staff, the housekeeper held the highest authority, while the butler oversaw the male servants. Each individual understood their role, duties, and boundaries. Living arrangements reflected this hierarchy. Female servants occupied rooms on the 2nd floor of the mansion, while male staff lived above them on the 3rd floor. Key employees lived elsewhere on the estate. The head gardener and his family resided in the gate lodge, while the chauffeur and groom lived in apartments above the carriage house. A poultry manager lived separately, close to the chicken houses that supported the estate's working farm. Daily life followed rigid routines. Meals were prepared in the basement kitchen and served at precise times. Staff moved through service corridors and staircases designed to keep household operations invisible to family and guests. Despite the structure, Stan Hiawatt was far from quiet. The Seiberlings entertained often, welcoming influential visitors from politics, entertainment, and culture. Former President William Howard Taft stayed at the estate in 1920 while traveling to promote the League of Nations. Helen Keller visited with her teacher and companion Annie Sullivan. Entertainers such as Will Rogers, Shirley Temple, and the Von Trapp family singers performed in the music room. Holidays brought the house to its limits. Christmas gatherings filled every corner of the mansion. The formal dining room could seat 50 guests, yet even that was insufficient for the extended family. Adults and older children dined formally, while younger children were seated in nearby rooms and hallways. Frank Seiberling encouraged his adult children to remain at Stan Hiawatt as long as they wished, and many did. Over time, the estate became home to multiple generations. Frank and Gertrude celebrated 58 wedding anniversaries and lived in the house for 4 decades. After Gertrude's death in 1946, Frank remained there until his own passing in 1955. World War I transformed Goodyear into an industrial powerhouse. The company produced aircraft tires, truck tires, balloon materials, and specialized fabrics for airships, supplying massive quantities to the Allied war effort.
By the end of the war, Goodyear was producing thousands of tires each day, employing tens of thousands of workers and generating enormous revenue. When the war ended, that momentum vanished almost overnight. Government contracts disappeared and the economy slid into recession. Goodyear, having expanded rapidly during wartime, was left burdened with debt it could no longer support. Sales collapsed, losses mounted, and the company's stock value disintegrated. Once valued at tens of millions of dollars, Goodyear's common stock became virtually worthless. Frank Seiberling still controlled vast assets across the world, but much of his wealth was tied up in property and infrastructure, not liquid cash. As creditors closed in, Goodyear turned to bankers for help. Temporary refinancing delayed the crisis, but it was not enough. In 1921, investment bankers agreed to rescue and reorganize the company on one condition: Frank Seiberling would have to step aside. After more than 2 decades, the founder walked away from the company he had built. His brother Charles left as well. Only a few members of the original leadership team remained. Years later, Frank would describe that moment with stark simplicity. He found himself without money, without a company, and forced to begin again. He was 62 years old.
Frank Seiberling's second act began with an old friendship. Years earlier, he had loaned money to Edgar B. Davis, who later struck oil in Texas and became wealthy. When Frank needed help most, Davis repaid that loyalty with a substantial advance, allowing Frank and his brother Charles to purchase a struggling rubber factory in Barberton, Ohio. In November 1921, the brothers reopened the facility as the Seiberling Rubber Company. The operation was modest at first, employing only a few hundred workers. Frank personally invited company leaders to dinner at Stan Highwit and outlined his vision. He told them that the Seiberling name on rubber would one day mean the same thing as sterling on silver: quality, trust, and durability. The company grew quickly. It produced tires for automobiles, trucks, buses, tractors, and heavy machinery. New designs improved durability and performance, setting the company apart from competitors. Within just 6 years, Seiberling Rubber rose from obscurity to become one of the largest tire manufacturers in the country. The advertising slogan reflected Frank's reputation: a name you can trust in rubber. As the company matured, Frank gradually stepped back from daily management. His son assumed leadership, while Frank became chairman. Charles Seiberling, who had stood beside his brother through triumph and collapse, died in 1946. Frank retired in 1950, at age 90, after more than half a century in the rubber industry. In 1965, Seiberling Rubber was acquired by Firestone. The name eventually disappeared from tires, but its legacy endured. In May 1935, a stockbroker from New York named Bill Wilson arrived in Akron for a failed business venture. Stranded with little money and struggling to maintain sobriety, Wilson found himself tempted to drink. Instead, he searched for another alcoholic to talk to, believing that connection was his only defense. His search led to Henrietta Seiberling, the daughter-in-law of Frank Seiberling. Henrietta lived in the Gate Lodge at Stan Highwit and had long been involved in efforts to help alcoholics. She arranged a meeting between Wilson and a local surgeon named Dr. Robert Smith, whose drinking had nearly destroyed his career. The meeting took place on Mother's Day, May 12, 1935. What was meant to be a short conversation stretched into hours. Wilson spoke openly about his alcoholism and his struggle to remain sober. For the first time, Dr. Smith heard his own experience reflected by someone who truly understood. That conversation changed both men's lives. Wilson stayed in Akron for several months, living with the Smith family. Together, the two men reflected, talked, and sought ways to help others. On June 10, 1935, Dr. Smith took his final drink.
That date is widely recognized as the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. The movement grew slowly but steadily. Meetings were held in homes. A book outlining the program was published in 1939, giving the organization its name. Dr. Smith remained in Akron, helping thousands of patients and advocating for alcoholism to be treated as a medical condition. The Gate Lodge at Stan Highway became a place of pilgrimage, marking the beginning of a global movement rooted in one quiet conversation. Frank Seiberling believed wealth carried responsibility. As Akron's population grew with the rubber industry, housing shortages followed. Frank purchased land and developed neighborhoods for workers, complete with parks and tree-lined streets. When company leaders refused to fund the projects, he paid for them himself. His generosity extended to healthcare, education, and conservation. He helped establish hospitals, supported colleges and universities, and played a central role in creating Akron's metropolitan park system. Over time, he donated hundreds of acres of land to preserve green space for future generations. After Frank's death in 1955, his children faced a difficult decision. None wished to maintain the enormous estate, but they remembered the words carved above the front door, "Not for us alone." In 1957, they donated Stan Highway to a nonprofit foundation. The house became a museum, preserved nearly intact, allowing the public to walk through its rooms and gardens. Stan Highway was later designated a National Historic Landmark. It remains one of the largest historic homes open to the public in the United States, a lasting testament to a life built on ambition, failure, resilience, and generosity. In 1918, Frank Seiberling's first grandchild was born at Stan Highway. John F. Seiberling, Jr. spent his early years surrounded by the estate's fields, forests, and rolling hills. Those childhood wanderings planted a lifelong love of nature. After serving in World War II and earning a law degree, John returned to Akron and later entered politics. In 1970, he won an upset election to Congress. Once there, he devoted himself to conservation, working across party lines to protect public lands. His efforts helped create the Cuyahoga Valley National Recreation Area and later led to the largest expansion of protected wilderness in American history through landmark legislation in Alaska. Over 16 years in Congress, John Seiberling helped preserve more than 100 million acres of land. He later received the Presidential Citizens Medal for his work. He often credited his mother for shaping his values and his grandfather's motto for guiding his life. Frank Seiberling preserved land for parks. His grandson preserved wilderness for a nation. Across generations, the words above the door remained true.